You can't keep acting like this, Ethan, Charlotte said, adjusting her wedding veil in front of the mirror. Our guests will notice something's wrong. Ethan Taylor shifted uncomfortably in his chair at the high-end bridal boutique. Everything's fine, Charlotte. It's just nerves. Nerves? She turned to face him, her piercing blue eyes fixed on his. You're CEO of a billion-dollar tech company. You deal with investors and board meetings every day. Since when do you get nervous? A wedding is different. It's a social event like any other, Charlotte replied, turning her attention back to the mirror, just more elaborate and with longer-lasting consequences. The way she talked about the wedding, clinical and calculated, made Ethan shift again. He watched his fiancée, beautiful in her designer dress, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling in his chest. Is the guest list finalized? He asked, attempting to change the subject. Yes, 352 of our closest friends and business associates, she said with a slight smirk. The cream of society, all gathered to witness our perfect union. The wedding planner burst into the room, her tablet in hand. Ms. Miller, we need to discuss the seating arrangements for the rehearsal dinner. And Mr. Taylor, your best man, called. There's an issue with the bachelor party venue. Cancel it, Ethan said abruptly. Charlotte spun around. Cancel it? Ethan, you can't. It's tradition. I'm not in the mood for celebrations. Not in the mood? Charlotte's voice rose slightly. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You've been distant, distracted. If you're having second thoughts— I'm not, Ethan interrupted, standing up. I just need some air. Handle the arrangements however you want. You're better at this stuff anyway. He walked out of the boutique, loosening his tie as he hit the sidewalk. The spring air did little to clear his head. In 1 week, he'd be married to Charlotte Miller, beautiful, sophisticated, and perfectly suited to be the wife of a young tech millionaire. It made perfect sense on paper. So why did he feel like he was suffocating? His phone buzzed. Another message from his assistant about wedding details. Ethan ignored it and kept walking, his mind drifting to his life before the money, before Charlotte, back when things were simpler. Back when— His phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Charlotte. The bridesmaid's final fitting is tomorrow. My friend from college is flying in to join them. You remember Emily Harper, don't you? Ethan stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the name on his screen. Emily Harper. His first love, the one who got away. The suffocating feeling in his chest grew stronger. He hadn't seen Emily in years, not since before he made his fortune. Not since she broke his heart without explanation, and now she would be at his wedding, as one of Charlotte's bridesmaids. Perfect, he muttered, shoving his phone back in his pocket. Just perfect. The security guard at his building nodded as Ethan strode past, heading straight for the private elevator to his penthouse. He needed a drink, or several. Anything to stop his mind from racing with memories of Emily, her laugh, her smile, the way she used to look at him like he was her whole world. 1 week until the wedding. 1 week until he committed to Charlotte for life. 1 week to bury the past once and for all. If only it were that simple. Tell me again why Emily Harper is one of your bridesmaids, Ethan asked Charlotte over dinner at their penthouse apartment. Charlotte delicately wiped her mouth with a silk napkin. We were roommates in college, remember? I told you this when we first started dating. You never mentioned staying in touch. We reconnected on social media last year. Charlotte studied him over her wineglass. Is that going to be a problem? Why would it be? Because she's your ex-girlfriend? The one you dated before you became— She gestured around their luxurious apartment. All this. Ethan pushed his barely touched food around his plate. Ancient history. Good. Because I need this wedding to be perfect. The press will be watching. My father's business associates will be there. Your investors— I know. The merger of two powerful families. A match made in corporate heaven. Charlotte's eyes narrowed, her voice steady but softer. Don't be cynical, Ethan. We're good together. You know we are. I've worked so hard to be the perfect partner for you. For us. And I thought that was enough. Faz, she looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of her wineglass. Maybe I wanted this wedding more than I wanted you to want me. But does that make me the villain? Do we? Of course. I don't expect grand romantic gestures. You don't expect me to play the doting housewife. We're partners. Equals. Ethan stood up, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 5 years ago, he'd been living in a tiny apartment, working on his startup. Now he was worth millions, engaged to a woman who looked perfect on paper. You're thinking about her, aren't you? Charlotte's voice was sharp. No. Liar. She joined him at the window. Listen to me, Ethan. Emily Harper is part of your past, A past you left behind when you became successful. Don't let her presence complicate things. I said it's ancient history. Charlotte touched his arm. Then prove it. Show everyone at this wedding that you've moved on. That you're happy with the choices you've made. Ethan forced a smile. Of course. Later that night, alone in his home office, he Googled Emily's name. The search revealed little, just a few social media profiles showing she'd become an art teacher. No fancy vacations, no designer clothes, no corporate success story. She looked happy, though. Her smile in the photos was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way Charlotte's never did. Ethan closed the browser, rubbing his temples. What was he doing? Charlotte was right. Emily was his past. A reminder of who he used to be, not who he was now. His phone buzzed with a message from Charlotte. Don't forget, rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. Emily will be there. Behave yourself. Ethan didn't reply. Tomorrow night he'd come face to face with the woman who broke his heart, the woman he'd never quite forgotten. What could possibly go wrong? The elegant banquet hall buzzed with conversation when Emily Harper walked in. Ethan's heart stopped for a moment. She looked exactly the same, yet completely different. Her dark hair was shorter now, falling just past her shoulders, but her warm brown eyes hadn't changed. Ethan, Charlotte's voice snapped him back to reality. The caterer needs your approval on the wine selection. But it was too late. Emily had seen him, and their eyes met across the room. For a brief moment, the noise faded away, and they were 22 again, young and in love. Then Charlotte appeared at his side, wrapping her arm possessively around his waist. "Emily, you made it!" "Wouldn't miss it," Emily replied, her voice soft but steady. "Congratulations to you both." "Thank you," Charlotte beamed. "Ethan, darling, say hello to Emily." "Hi," he managed, his throat dry. "Hi," Emily echoed. An awkward silence fell between them until Charlotte broke it. "Emily, let me introduce you to the other bridesmaids. Ethan, don't forget about the wine." As Charlotte led Emily away, Ethan escaped to the balcony. The cool night air did nothing to calm his racing thoughts. "You look well." He turned. Emily stood in the doorway, hesitating before stepping out to join him. "So do you," he said. "Teaching suits you. You've been checking up on me." "Just curious." Emily leaned against the railing. "Charlotte seems perfect for you. Successful, ambitious, like you weren't." "That's not fair, Ethan." Neither was leaving without an explanation. Emily tensed. It was complicated. "Try me." "This isn't the time or place," she said, turning to go. "It's your rehearsal dinner." Ethan caught her arm. "Emily, don't." She pulled away. "You're getting married in 3 days to my friend. Whatever happened between us, it's in the past." "Is it?" Before she could answer, Charlotte's voice rang out. "Ethan, where are you? The toasts are starting." Emily stepped back into the shadows. "Go. Your fiancé needs you." Ethan watched her disappear back into the party, his mind spinning. He'd thought seeing her again would bring closure. Instead, it had reopened every wound he'd thought long healed. Inside, Charlotte was waiting, perfect smile in place. "Everything okay?" "Fine," he lied, taking his place beside her. But as the speeches began, his eyes kept drifting to Emily, and each time they did, she was already looking at him. Some things, it seemed, weren't as firmly in the past as he'd thought. Lying awake that night, Ethan couldn't stop the flood of memories. Their first meeting in the university coffee shop where Emily worked part-time, her paint-stained hands as she worked on her art projects, the way she'd laugh at his terrible jokes. His phone lit up with a text. Unknown number. "We should talk. Coffee tomorrow? Emily?" Ethan sat up in bed, staring at the screen. Charlotte stirred beside him but didn't wake. "Where?" he typed back. "The old place, 9 a.m. Joe's coffee shop, where it all began, where it had ended too." The next morning, he made an excuse about a business meeting. Charlotte barely looked up from her wedding planning binder. Emily was already there when he arrived, sitting at their old table by the window. She had a sketchbook open in front of her, just like old times. "You still draw?" he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Some habits die hard." She closed the book. "Thanks for coming. Why did you want to meet?" "Because we can't keep looking at each other like we did last night. Not with your wedding in 2 days. Ethan wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "You left me, Emily, without warning, without explanation. I deserved better than that." "My father was sick," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "Cancer. We couldn't afford the treatments, and I didn't want to burden you. Then the investors came to me. They said your success depended on letting go of distractions. That meant me. They even offered money for my father's care." She paused, tears forming in her eyes. At first I refused, but every day I saw how much pressure you were under, how much you sacrificed for your dream. I thought stepping away was the only way to help you. Couldn't what? Be the reason you gave up on your dreams. You would have tried to help, spent money you needed for the business. Of course I would have, I loved you. The past tense hung heavy between them. And now you're marrying Charlotte, Emily said. Does she make you happy? She makes sense. That's not what I asked. Ethan looked out the window. Why are you really here, Emily? Because I need to know if I made the right choice back then, and because you need to be sure about the choice you're making now. My father survived, by the way, she added softly. We managed somehow, but by then you were already successful. Already with Charlotte. You could have come back. Would it have made a difference? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Charlotte. I have to go, he said, standing. Ethan. Emily caught his hand. Just be sure. About Saturday. Be very sure. He pulled away, but her touch lingered on his skin all the way back to the office. Back to his carefully constructed life that suddenly felt like it was built on sand. Where were you this morning? Charlotte confronted Ethan as soon as he walked into their apartment that evening. I told you. Business meeting. Really? Because I called your office. Your assistant said you weren't in. Ethan loosened his tie. I was meeting with a potential investor. Off-site. Don't lie to me. Charlotte held up her phone. Someone saw you at Joe's coffee shop, with Emily. The silence stretched between them. It wasn't what you think, he finally said. Then what was it? Charlotte's voice was controlled, but her hands shook slightly. What could be so important that you had to meet your ex-girlfriend 2 days before our wedding? She wanted to explain why she left years ago, and that couldn't wait until after the wedding. Charlotte. No, she cut him off. I've watched you since the rehearsal dinner, the way you look at her. I'm not blind, Ethan. Nothing happened. But you wanted it to, didn't you? He couldn't answer. Charlotte laughed bitterly. You know what's funny? I always knew I wasn't your great love story. I was okay with that. We're good together, Ethan. We make sense. Love is overrated. Is that what you really believe? It's what I know. She stepped closer. We're a power couple. We understand each other. Isn't that better than some romantic fantasy? I don't know anymore. Well, figure it out, fast. Charlotte's voice hardened. Because if you're going to humiliate me at this wedding, I'd rather know now. I wouldn't you? She met his eyes. Can you stand at that altar and promise to love only me, knowing she's watching, knowing she still has feelings for you? She doesn't. Please, I saw how she looked at you, too. Charlotte grabbed her purse. I'm staying at my parents' tonight. Use the time to decide what you want, Ethan. But remember, there are consequences to every choice. She paused at the door. And Ethan, if you choose her, if you do that to me, I'll make sure you regret it, both of you. The door slammed behind her, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and a decision that would change everything. Ethan paced his penthouse, bourbon in hand. Charlotte's words echoed in his mind, mixing with memories of Emily. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through old photos he'd never deleted, pictures of him and Emily from years ago, both smiling, both happy. His finger hovered over Emily's number. Don't, he muttered to himself, but pressed call anyway. Ethan, her voice was hesitant. It's late. Charlotte knows about this morning. A pause. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked you to meet me. No, I needed to know. About your father, about why you left. It doesn't change anything, Emily said softly. You're getting married tomorrow. What if it does change things? The bourbon made him bold. What if I can't go through with it? Ethan, stop. Tell me you don't feel it too. That spark between us, it's still there. Of course I feel it, Emily's voice cracked. But feeling something doesn't make it right. Then what's right? Marrying someone I don't love? You must love her, on some level. You proposed. Ethan sank onto his couch. I proposed because it made sense, because she fits into my world now, but she's not... Not what? Not you. The silence stretched between them. I can't be the reason you call off your wedding, Emily finally said. I won't be that person. You're not the reason. You're the wake-up call. Ethan stood, moving to the window. I've been living someone else's life, Emily. The successful CEO, the perfect fiancé, the mansion, the parties, none of it feels real. People change, Ethan. Maybe this is who you are now, or maybe I lost myself somewhere along the way. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass. Do you ever think about us? What might have been? Don't, she whispered. Please don't ask me that. I need to know. Of course I think about it. Emily's voice was barely audible. Every day. But it doesn't matter now. You have a life with Charlotte. A good life. A safe line, an empty line. Ethan, I have to go. He hung up abruptly, his heart pounding. His phone immediately buzzed with texts from Charlotte. Have you made your decision? The florists need final confirmation for tomorrow. My father's lawyers are waiting to file the prenup. Each message felt like another brick in a wall closing in around him. He thought about Emily's paintings, her passion for teaching, her genuine smile. Then he thought about Charlotte's calculated moves, her social climbing, her perfect but cold efficiency. Money had changed him, he realized, or maybe he'd changed himself to fit the money. Somewhere between his startup success and meeting Charlotte, he'd forgotten who he really was. He walked to his home office and opened his laptop. With trembling fingers, he began to type. Dear Charlotte, I'm sorry, but I can't go through with the wedding. You deserve someone who loves you completely, and I'm not that person. I realize now that I've been living a lie, trying to be someone I'm not. He stopped, staring at the words on the screen. One email could change everything. End the charade, free him, or destroy him completely. His finger hovered over the send button as dawn began to break over the city. Ethan didn't send the email. Instead, he found himself driving to Emily's apartment building at dawn. He sat in his car for 20 minutes before gathering the courage to text her. I'm outside. Please, 5 minutes. Emily appeared at the building entrance in paint-stained sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, her hair messy from sleep. She looked more real than anything in his life had felt in years. You shouldn't be here, she said, but sat beside him in the car anyway. I need to understand everything. He turned to face her. That day you left, there's more to the story, isn't there? Emily stared at her hands. Your company was just taking off. You were so excited, working day and night. Then my father got sick. You said that already. What I didn't say was that your investors came to see me. Ethan froze. What? They said your attachment to me was distracting, that a CEO needed a certain image, certain connections. They mentioned Charlotte specifically. They had no right. They were right, Ethan. Look at your life now. Look at what you've achieved. At what cost? His hands gripped the steering wheel. They manipulated everything. They saw potential in you. Charlotte could open doors I never could. Her family's connections, their influence. So you just gave up, walked away? Emily's eyes filled with tears. I needed money for my father's treatment. They offered to help, in exchange for stepping aside. They bought you off? Ethan's voice cracked. I took the deal because I had to, because my father was dying and you were destined for bigger things than a struggling artist could give you. The silence in the car was deafening. I never cashed their check, Emily whispered. I found another way, but by then you were already rising in the business world, already dating Charlotte. You should have told me. Would it have made a difference? Look at your life now, Ethan. The success, the recognition, the emptiness, he interrupted, the constant pretending. Do you know how exhausting it is being who they want me to be? Then don't be. Emily turned to face him. But don't blame our past for your present choices. You chose this life, chose Charlotte, because I thought I'd lost you forever, because it was easier than feeling that pain. And now? Now I don't know anything anymore. He leaned back, closing his eyes. Except that I'm supposed to get married in 12 hours, and I'm sitting in my car with the only woman I've ever truly loved. Emily's breath caught. Don't. Please don't say things like that. Why not? It's the truth. Because in a few hours you're going to walk down that aisle with Charlotte. You're going to do what's expected of you, and I'm going to sit there and watch, because that's what we both have to do. She opened the car door. Goodbye, Ethan. Be happy. Really try to be happy. He watched her walk away, carrying the weight of a truth that changed everything and nothing at the same time. The sun was fully up now, marking the beginning of his wedding day. A day that suddenly felt more impossible than ever. The wedding venue bustled with activity. Florists arranged elaborate centerpieces, caterers prepared the reception hall, and wedding planners scurried about with clipboards and headsets. Ethan stood in front of a mirror in his dressing room, struggling with his bow tie. His best man, Mark, watched with concern. You look like hell, Mark observed. Couldn't sleep. Having second thoughts? Before Ethan could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. Everything perfect on your end? The press is already gathering outside. It's not too late, you know, Mark said quietly, to walk away and face the consequences, the scandal, the business fallout. Since when do you care about any of that? Mark stepped forward, fixing Ethan's tie. The Ethan I knew in college wouldn't have given a damn about appearances. Through the window, Ethan spotted Emily helping to organize the bridesmaids. She was laughing at something, her face lighting up in that way he remembered so well. She told me about the investors. Ethan said. About their deal. Mark froze. What deal? They paid her to leave me, to make way for Charlotte. Jesus. Mark shook his head. And you're still going through with this? What choice do I have? There's always a choice, man. Always. A knock at the door interrupted them. Charlotte's father, Richard Miller, stepped in. 5 minutes until we start, Ethan. Everything all right? Fine, sir. Richard closed the door behind him. I hear you had an interesting conversation with Emily Harper yesterday. Ethan's stomach dropped. You knew about the investors' deal. I orchestrated it. Richard smiled coldly. You had potential, Ethan. Still do. But you needed guidance, the right connections, the right wife. You manipulated my entire life. I shaped it. There's a difference. Richard straightened his cufflinks. Now shall we proceed with the ceremony? Unless you'd prefer I make some calls about those pending contracts your company needs? The threat was clear. I'll be there, Ethan said through gritted teeth. Richard nodded and left. Mark whistled low. That's some father-in-law you're getting. Ethan looked out the window again. Emily was now alone, adjusting flowers at the altar. Everything about her was real, genuine, unlike the artificial world he'd been living in. The wedding march began to play. Time to choose, brother, Mark said. Who are you going to be? The man they created, or the man you really are? Ethan straightened his jacket, his mind racing. In 10 minutes he'd be standing at that altar, making vows he wasn't sure he could keep, and Emily would be watching. The wedding march played as guests rose to their feet. Charlotte appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in white, but Ethan's eyes kept drifting to Emily, standing with the other bridesmaids. As the minister began speaking, Ethan's hands trembled. Charlotte squeezed them tighter, her smile perfectly practiced. Dearly beloved. Ethan's mind raced back to his conversation with Richard Miller, to Emily's revelation, to all the carefully orchestrated moments that had led him here. If anyone has reason why these two should not be joined. Emily shifted uncomfortably among the bridesmaids. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment something inside Ethan snapped. I can't, he said, his voice cutting through the minister's words. Charlotte's smile froze. What? I can't do this. Ethan's voice cracked, his hands trembling as he loosened his bow tie. Charlotte, I've been lying to myself. I've been trying so hard to be the man everyone expects me to be. Your father, my investors, society. But I can't anymore. I've lost myself and I can't make these vows without knowing who I really am. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Richard Miller stood up, his face darkening. Ethan, Charlotte hissed, don't you dare. I know about the investors, about the deal with Emily, about all of it. Charlotte's face paled. That was years ago. It doesn't matter now. It matters because it was all orchestrated. Every moment, every choice. None of it was real. Think carefully about what you're doing. Richard called from his seat, his voice low but sharp. You walk away now, and I'll make sure your company burns. Contracts cancelled, partnerships dissolved. Let's see if you can rebuild from the ashes, Ethan. The menace in his tone left no doubt. This wasn't an empty threat. Ethan turned to face the guests. I'm sorry for wasting your time, but I can't marry someone I don't love. Not when... He stopped, his eyes finding Emily's shocked face. Not when my heart isn't in it. Ethan took a deep breath, looking directly at Charlotte. You deserve someone who can give you everything, and I'm not that person. I'm sorry. Charlotte stepped back as if slapped. You bastard, she spat. After everything we built, you built it, Ethan replied. You and your father. I just played my part. He turned to leave, but Richard blocked his path. Think about what you're throwing away, Richard growled. Your company, your reputation. Keep them. Ethan pulled off his bow tie completely. I'd rather have nothing and be myself than everything and be a lie. He walked down the aisle, past the shocked guests, past Charlotte's fury and Richard's threats. At the door he paused, looking back at Emily. She stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, he mouthed to her, then pushed through the doors into the sunlight. Behind him, chaos erupted. But for the first time in years, his mind was clear. He'd chosen truth over appearance, love over convenience. Now he just had to face the consequences. His phone buzzed with incoming calls and messages, but he ignored them all. He got in his car and drove, leaving behind the perfect wedding, the perfect life, and all its perfect lies. He had no idea what came next, but at least it would be real. A week after the wedding disaster, Charlotte stormed into Ethan's office unannounced. You've ruined everything, she said, slamming her hands on his desk. Do you have any idea what you've done? Ethan looked up from his laptop. I imagine the press had a field day. The press? That's what you're worried about? She laughed bitterly. My father's pulling all his business connections. Your stock prices are dropping. The board is considering removing you as CEO. I expected as much. And you don't care? Honestly? No. He closed his laptop. For the first time in years, I feel like myself. Charlotte sank into a chair. Was it all a lie? Everything between us? No. I cared about you, Charlotte. Still do. But not the way a husband should care about his wife. Because of her? Charlotte's voice cracked. Emily? Because of me. I lost myself trying to be the person your father wanted, the person you wanted. I wanted someone who understood ambition, who wouldn't let emotions cloud their judgment. And that's exactly why we wouldn't have worked. Ethan stood, walking to the window. I don't want to live without emotions anymore. So what now? You think Emily will just run back to you? This isn't about Emily. It's about being honest with myself. Charlotte stood, smoothing her designer dress. Well, enjoy your honesty. I hope it keeps you warm when you're running a food truck instead of a tech company. Is that what your father's planning? He's planning much worse. She headed for the door. You chose the wrong enemy, Ethan. I didn't choose any enemies, I just chose myself. She paused at the door. You know what's ironic? I actually respected you for having the guts to walk away. But now? She shook her head. Now I just pity you. After she left, Ethan's assistant rushed in. Sir, the board is calling an emergency meeting, and the press is downstairs. Let them come, Ethan said, turning back to the window. I've got nothing left to hide. His phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Just saw the news about the board meeting. Are you okay? He smiled, typing back, never better. And surprisingly, it wasn't a lie. The boardroom was packed. 12 stern faces stared at Ethan as he took his seat at the head of the table. Mr. Taylor, the chairman began, in light of recent events and the company's declining stock value, we need to discuss your position. You mean my very public wedding disaster? Ethan replied calmly. Among other things. The chairman shuffled some papers. Richard Miller has withdrawn all support from our Asian expansion. 3 major investors have pulled out, and your personal choices have made the company look unstable. I understand. Do you? Another board member leaned forward. You threw away a strategic alliance for what? Some romantic gesture? Ethan stood slowly. Let me save you all some time. I know you're going to ask for my resignation, and I'm going to give it to you. Murmurs filled the room. But first, let me tell you something. This company started in my garage. No investors, no connections, just good ideas and hard work. Then I let people convince me that success meant playing by their rules, being who they wanted me to be. Mr. Taylor, I'm not finished. Ethan's voice was firm. You want my resignation? Fine. But the core patents, the technology that makes this company valuable, that stays with me. The chairman's face paled. You can't. Actually, I can. Check the original incorporation documents. I maintained control of the intellectual property. You get the company, but I get my innovations. Silence fell over the room. So, Ethan continued, we can do this the hard way, with lawyers and courts and more scandal. Or we can negotiate a clean break that benefits everyone. The board members exchanged glances. What are your terms? The chairman finally asked. I stepped down quietly. You get to appoint new leadership, but I retain rights to my original patents and the freedom to start fresh. Your reputation is already in shambles. Ethan smiled. Thanks to the Millers. I've got nothing left to lose. The chairman cleared his throat. We'll need to discuss this. Take your time. Ethan headed for the door. But remember, I've already proven I'm willing to walk away from things that don't serve my soul anymore. Outside the boardroom, his phone buzzed. Emily again. How did it go? He typed back. Just took control of my life again. Want to grab coffee? Her response came quickly. The old place? 30 minutes? For the first time since the wedding, Ethan felt truly free. He had no idea what came next, but at least every step would be his choice. And maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't be walking alone. Joe's coffee shop was quiet when Ethan arrived. Emily sat at their old table, 2 cups already waiting. You ordered my usual, he noticed, sitting down. Some things you don't forget. She pushed his coffee toward him. Black, 2 sugars. Emily, Don't. She held up her hand. Before you say anything, I need you to listen. Ethan's heart sank at her tone. What you did at the wedding, she began, walking away from everything. It was brave, but I can't be your prize for being brave. That's not what this is. Isn't it? She met his eyes. You found out about the investors, About why I left and suddenly you're willing to throw everything away. I threw it away because it wasn't real. And what we had was, Emily's voice cracked. We were kids, Ethan. Young and in love and naive. Our feelings were real. Yes, they were. But that doesn't mean they should dictate our choices now. She wrapped her hands around her cup. You just lost your company, your status, probably most of your friends. I don't care about any of that. But I care. Emily pushed back from the table. I can't be responsible for your life falling apart. I won't be the reason you threw everything away. You're not the reason, Ethan insisted. You're the wake-up call that made me see how fake everything had become. And now what? We pick up where we left off. Pretend the last 5 years never happened. Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled away. I have a life now, Ethan. A career I love. Students who depend on me. I can't just drop everything because you've had an epiphany. I'm not asking you to. Yes, you are. She stood up. You're looking at me like I'm your salvation, like loving me will somehow make everything right again. Emily? No. She gathered her things. I loved you once, Ethan. So much it hurt, but I'm not that girl anymore, and you're not that boy. We can't go backward. Then we go forward. Together. I can't. Tears filled her eyes. Not like this. Not when you're still figuring out who you are without all the trappings of success. She paused at the table. Ethan, Emily began, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. I loved you once, and a part of me always will, but I can't be your anchor while you're still drifting. You need to take the time to find out who you are, what you really want, not for me or for Charlotte, or for anyone else, but for yourself. She stepped back, her hand trembling as it left his. If, after all that, you still believe we could have a future together, then maybe we can talk. But right now I have to let you go for both our sakes. His phone buzzed. Another news alert about his company's stock dropping. Another reminder of everything he'd lost. But for the first time he wondered if Emily was right. Maybe he needed to find himself before he could find his way back to her. 3 months passed. Ethan moved out of his penthouse into a modest apartment, trading designer suits for jeans and t-shirts. The press eventually lost interest in his story, finding new scandals to chase. He sat in his small home office, surrounded by whiteboards covered in code and sketches. His new startup was taking shape, something smaller, more meaningful than his previous company. His phone rang. Mark, how's Exile treating you? His friend asked. Actually, pretty well. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Been coding again. Remember that app idea we had in college? The one about connecting local artists with venues. Yeah, I'm building it. For real this time. Mark chuckled. Charlotte would have hated that. Charlotte hated anything that didn't come with a guaranteed ROI. Speaking of, Mark paused. Have you heard? She's engaged again. Some hedge fund manager. Good for her. Ethan was surprised to find he meant it. And Emily? Ethan's chest tightened. Still giving me space, still teaching art. You know she was right, Mark said. About needing to find yourself first. I know. Ethan looked at his whiteboards. That's what I'm trying to do. By building an app for starving artists. By remembering who I was before the money. Before everyone started telling me who I should be. He heard Mark sigh. You seem happier. I am. Broke, but happier. Not exactly broke. You still have those patents, which I'm using to fund something worthwhile this time. After hanging up, Ethan walked to his window. His view wasn't of the city skyline anymore, but of a small park where local artists sometimes set up their easels. He'd seen Emily there once, teaching a children's art class. He'd watched from afar as she helped tiny hands hold paintbrushes, her face lit up with genuine joy. She'd been right. They couldn't go backward. But maybe, once he figured out who he really was, they could create something new. His laptop pinged with a notification, another article about his fall from grace. He closed it without reading. Some falls, he was learning, were really just returns to solid ground. Welcome to the local arts festival, read the banner above the park entrance. Ethan walked through, tablet in hand, testing his new app's venue mapping feature. Then he saw her. Emily stood by a display of student artwork, explaining techniques to interested parents. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, paint smudges on her hands, exactly as he remembered her from college. She looked up and their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Hi, he said, walking over. Hi. She gestured to his casual attire. The suits are gone, I see. Along with the pretense, he smiled. Your students are talented. They're fearless. They create without worrying what anyone thinks. She studied him. You look good, Ethan. More you. I feel more me. He showed her his tablet. Remember that app idea I had in college, about connecting artists with venues? The one you abandoned for your tech company? I'm building it now. Actually building it, not just chasing profits. Emily's expression softened. What made you come back to it? Remembering who I was, who I wanted to be. He met her eyes. You were right, you know, about needing to find myself first. A kid ran up to Emily, tugging her sleeve. Miss Harper, Tommy's eating the paint again. Duty calls, she laughed. It was good seeing you, Ethan. Emily? He called as she turned away. I'm sorry. Not for leaving Charlotte, but for expecting you to just step back into my life. You deserved better than that. She paused. Thank you. That means a lot. Would you maybe want to get coffee sometime? As friends? I'd love to show you how the app works. Get your input as an artist. Emily hesitated, then smiled. Coffee sounds nice, but just coffee, he agreed. As she hurried off to handle the paint-eating crisis, Ethan felt lighter than he had in months. He didn't know if they would ever recapture what they'd lost, but maybe they could build something new, something real. He opened his app, adding another marker on the map. Children's Art Display, Emily Harper. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before adding, fearless creation happening here. It was a small step, but small steps, he was learning, often led to the most important destinations. Your app is actually pretty amazing, Emily said, scrolling through her phone. They sat at Joe's coffee shop, now a regular meeting spot over the past few weeks. Thanks, local artists are really embracing it. Ethan watched her explore the interface. Though I could use an art consultant. Emily looked up, raising an eyebrow. Are you offering me a job? Maybe interested? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. She checked it, her face falling slightly. Everything okay? Ethan asked. Yeah, just... She sighed. I was engaged. Last month I broke it off. Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. You were engaged? To another teacher. Nice guy, stable life. She traced the rim of her cup. But I couldn't go through with it. Why not? Because every time he talked about our future, I kept thinking about... She met his eyes. About you. The coffee shop seemed to fade away around them. I broke it off because I realized something, Emily continued. All these years, I've been playing it safe. Teaching is my passion, but I was letting fear control the rest of my life. Fear of what? Of taking risks, of getting hurt again. She reached across the table, taking his hand. Of admitting that I never stopped loving you. Ethan's heart pounded. Emily, let me finish. I've watched you these past few weeks. How you've changed, found yourself again. You're the Ethan I fell in love with in college, but better, stronger. And you're still the Emily who made me want to be better, he said softly. So maybe, she squeezed his hand, maybe we can try again. Not picking up where we left off, but starting something new. As an art consultant, he teased. As whatever we want to be. She smiled. No investors, no deals, no expectations. Just us. Ethan stood, pulling her up with him. In front of everyone at Joe's coffee shop, he kissed her. Their first kiss in 5 years. When they broke apart, Emily laughed. The barista is clapping. Let them clap. Ethan pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, Emily Harper. I never stopped. I love you too, she grinned. But I'm still charging consulting fees for the app. Worth every penny. They left the coffee shop hand in hand, stepping into a future neither had planned, but both had secretly hoped for. Sometimes, Ethan realized, you had to lose everything to find what really mattered. You really want to live here? Emily asked, looking around the small house on the outskirts of the city. It's nothing like your penthouse. That's exactly why I love it. Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind. Plus, the backyard is perfect for an art studio. 6 months had passed since their reunion at Joe's coffee shop. Ethan's app had taken off, connecting artists across the city. Emily had indeed become his art consultant, bringing her expertise and passion to the project. The bedroom could be your office, she suggested, walking through the house. And this room, this would be perfect for painting classes. Planning to move your students here? Emily turned to face him. Actually, I've been thinking, what if I started my own art school? Something small, focused on nurturing creativity rather than just teaching techniques. Using the app to showcase student work. Exactly. Her eyes lit up with excitement. We could create a real community of artists. Ethan pulled out his tablet, already sketching ideas. We could add a feature for student portfolios, virtual galleries. Look at us, Emily laughed, planning a future together over property layouts and app features. Better than planning it over stock portfolios and corporate mergers. they heard a car pull up outside. Mark arrived with pizza and champagne. "To new beginnings," he toasted as they sat on moving boxes in their empty living room. "And to finally seeing my best friends happy." "How's the tech world treating you?" Ethan asked. "Boring without you there to shake things up." Mark grinned. "Though Charlotte's new husband is doing his best to fill your shoes." "Good for them," Emily said, and meant it. The past was truly behind them now. Later that night, after Mark left, Ethan and Emily stood in their backyard under the stars. "No regrets?" he asked. "About leaving your apartment? Your stable teaching job?" "None." She leaned against him. "Sometimes the riskiest choices are the most right. Like walking out of your own wedding. Like telling your ex you still love them in a coffee shop." Ethan kissed her softly. "We did everything backward, didn't we? Maybe. But we got here in the end." Inside the house, their phones pinged with notifications from the app. More artists signing up, more venues opening their doors. Their small idea was growing, creating connections they never imagined possible. "Ready to build something real?" Ethan asked. Emily looked at their new home, their shared dream taking shape. "With you, always." The city lights twinkled in the distance, but for once, Ethan didn't miss his view from the penthouse. He had everything he needed right here. Love, purpose, and a future built on truth rather than expectations. Sometimes you had to come full circle to find your true path. 2 years later, the backyard was transformed. An art studio stood where there had once been empty space, filled with the sounds of children laughing and creating. Emily moved between easels, offering guidance and encouragement to her students. Through the studio's windows, Ethan watched while coding on his laptop. His app had evolved into a thriving platform, connecting artists not just locally but across the country. Yet he kept the company small, focused on its original mission rather than chasing endless growth. "Mr. Taylor," one of Emily's young students ran up to him. "Look what I painted." "That's beautiful, Sophie." He smiled, examining the colorful abstract. "Should we put it on your gallery page?" Emily appeared in the doorway, paint smudges on her cheek. "Class is wrapping up. Ready for our announcement?" They had gathered their closest friends for dinner. Mark, some of Emily's fellow teachers, artists they'd met through the app. No corporate bigwigs, no social climbers, just genuine people who shared their vision. "So," Emily began, holding Ethan's hand under the table, "we have some news." "You're pregnant," Mark guessed, making Emily laugh. "Not yet," she said. "But we are expanding the family in another way. We're opening 3 new art schools." Their friends erupted in cheers. "The app will connect all the schools," Ethan explained, "creating a network of creativity and support." "Far cry from your tech empire days," Mark noted. "But so much better," Ethan replied, squeezing Emily's hand. Later that night, they sat in their backyard watching the stars. Emily's head rested on Ethan's shoulder. "Charlotte sent me a message today," she said quietly. "Oh?" "She's starting an art therapy program at her foundation. Asked if we'd be interested in collaborating." Ethan smiled. "Time really does heal all wounds. Should we do it?" "If you want to. We're not those people anymore, letting old hurts guide our choices." Emily kissed him softly. "No, we're not." Inside, their phones pinged with notifications. More artists joining the platform, more students signing up for classes. But for once, the technology could wait. They had built something real together, not just a business or a school, but a life based on authenticity and shared dreams. "Remember when you walked out of that wedding?" Emily asked. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," she corrected, touching the simple wedding band on his finger, so different from the flashy engagement ring he'd once given Charlotte. They had married 6 months ago, a small ceremony in their backyard studio. No press, no corporate sponsors, just love, art, and truth. Some endings were really beginnings in disguise, and sometimes the longest road led exactly where you were meant to be all along. Ethan pulled Emily closer, grateful for every step, even the painful ones, that had brought them here. Their future stretched before them, as blank and full of possibility as an empty canvas, ready to be filled with colors only they could create together. Hey everyone, if you've enjoyed this modern love story about Ethan and Emily, how sometimes we need to lose everything to find what truly matters, and how real love can survive time and circumstances, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who might need a reminder that authentic happiness is worth more than any superficial success. I'd love to know what you thought about Ethan's journey from corporate success to finding his true self, and Emily's strength in both letting him go and giving love a second chance. Drop a comment below telling me which part of their story resonated with you the most, And don't forget to let me know which country you're watching from. If you want to see more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell to stay updated on new uploads.